So I have a rhetorical question for you. So just think about this for yourself. And I'm going to talk for a little bit so you can think about it, and then we'll come back to it. But why do we care when something breaks? So I've mentioned to you before, I grew up playing baseball. My brother Richard and I both played baseball, and we loved baseball a lot in the summertime, in the spring, in the winter, whatever it was, like we were playing baseball. And we were so obsessed with baseball that on rainy days when we were kids, we would still play baseball, but we would play baseball in the house. But we didn't really play baseball in the house. We had more sense than that. We played what lots of little kids in rural Mississippi played. We played what we called cup ball. And cup ball was either you take a bunch of paper and wad it up, or you take a plastic cup and you compress it, and then you just wrap it over and over and over again with masking tape until you get a ball. And it's not as hard as a baseball, but it's pretty hard. And so when our parents were away and it was raining outside and we couldn't go and play, Richard and I decided that the thing we ought to do is play cup ball in the house. Now, our house, when we were kids, had 2 living rooms. We had one living room that we actually lived in, like where our television was and where we sat around and we read and did all of those things. And then we had what my mom called the nice living room. And you knew it was the nice living room because you didn't touch anything in the nice living room. When people would come over to our house to visit and my parents would talk to them, they wouldn't go in the regular living room. They would go in the nice living room. So that's where if you've got trinkets, nice things, all of that was in there. My mom's beautiful piano that she loved in that living room. And so we decided that that should be the place where we played cup ball. And it was probably because of the way the furniture was arranged. We could easily have a pitcher's mound with some distance and a first and second and third base. So one day we're in there playing cup ball, and in the middle of this living room, there is this large ceramic eagle. And at one point in her life, my mother got very interested in ceramics. So she had handmade this ceramic eagle. She made it, she glazed it, she painted it, all of that, and it was in the living room, in the nice living room where we weren't supposed to go. And that's where Richard and I decided to play cup ball. Can you see where the story is going? So we're playing, and it's getting late in the day and late in the game, and I'm losing and I'm batting, and you hit a cup ball with your hands. And so I really want to win because I'm competitive like that. Richard throws the cup ball, I swing, I hit it, and almost as if it had a tracking beam on it, it headed straight for that bald eagle that my mom made, and it hit every last bit of it. It exploded all over the living room. And this is the moment where kids go into crisis management. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna explain this? There are 1,000 pieces. Is there enough super glue in the house? Is there enough super glue in the world? Maybe she won't notice? And I finally look at Richard and I say, I think we're just gonna have to take this one. And he looked at me and says, I think you're just gonna have to take this one. And it wasn't long after that, my mom came home and sat down, and I explained to her exactly what happened. And my mother, who was not a stranger to stern punishments, didn't do anything, didn't say anything. She was just kind of heartbroken about the whole thing. I could look in her eyes, I could tell that she cared. We all care when something we care about gets broken. And particularly if that something that we care about is broken is us. And I think we care because we know what it feels like to be broken. Maybe even some of us have experiences with someone in our life, maybe in our childhood, the way that we were raised, where we feel like someone else really heavily participated in us becoming broken. And we care about it not just in our pains and disappointments, but like this disconnection that we feel when all is not right with us or in between us and other people, and even with God. So a moral philosopher that I really like named Alistair McIntyre said years ago that what happened with the Enlightenment is that we moved from thinking that virtues made us good, that we live now in a period of time that he would describe as after virtue, and that we have moved to one that the idea of what makes a person good or whole or healthy isn't pursuit of any sort of virtues, but the pursuit of one's own self, like one's own desires or appetites. He says there was a time where humans actually believed that what helped us flourish as individuals and communities, as nations, was that we believed that the world and that humans operated in a particular way. And what's happened after the Enlightenment is that we have shifted away from believing that virtues and the way that we are made or the way that we are formed creates flourishing. And we have decided that the best life isn't to nurture virtues, but whatever we think is good for today. Whatever we want today. Whatever we like today. Like I have this good friend who kind of complains to me a good bit that I am always really hard on the theological and political left, and that I am also really hard on the theological and political right. And the reason is, like, I just don't like zeitgeist. I don't like just whatever's popular right now, just whatever people think, regardless of how they got there, like the language that we use, because I deeply believe that everybody who came before us wasn't stupid, that we actually come to agree about why some things are good and healthy and whole and why some things aren't, and we are not the first people here. And so what McIntyre says in After Virtue is that all of this belief that what we want today, what we want to pursue today, this leaves us as people who are living on fragments. Like, I'll take a little of this, and I'll take a little of that, and I'll have a little bit of this. And we're left with fragments. We are choosing, in so many ways, to live incoherent and broken life, thousands of different pieces, and there's not enough super glue in the world to put that back together. So Philip Kennison talks about it this way. He says, gone forever are the days when people were in face-to-face relationships with only a small group of people who shared most experiences of life. Instead, the people who shared most experiences of life, instead, the people who live near are rarely the people with whom we work. The people with whom we work are rarely the people with whom we play. And often none of these are the people with whom we worship. And in the electronics age, we often have contact with countless numbers of people to whom we remain all but anonymous. In short, we regularly find ourselves moving in a dizzying number of settings with expectations whose expectations are radically different, the result is often a sense of fragmentation, a disturbing sense that not only our lives, but also our very identities are fractured into scores of isolated, if not contradictory, fragments. So if you've been around Ecclesia, as Pastor Chris talked about, we have been in this series on the fruit of the Spirit that Paul writes about in Galatians 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And we haven't had time and opportunity to talk about all of them, but the one that I want to share a little bit about this morning is the one that can actually help us in a fragmented world, which is peace. And what the scriptures say is that a person whose life, whose body is inhabited by the Spirit of God is a person who nurtures the virtue of peace, that actually endeavors to live as a person of peace. Now, most of the time when folks hear the word peace, what we think about is the absence of conflict. And it's true that peace does mean the absence of conflict, but it means so much more than that in the grand scheme of what the scriptures are talking about. So I wanted to show you something. This is my quilt, and it's not mine because I made it, because I don't roll like that. And you'll see, my mother made this quilt for me a very long time ago, over 30 years ago. Rochelle and I took this quilt on our very first date, which was in 1995, before Ecclesia was started. This was on the floor when we held our babies. This quilt has been everywhere with us. And this is what it looks like to live at peace. Because what this quilt actually is are threads that are woven together. So imagine if I were just to start pulling this apart. Pull apart every piece of it, every stitch of it, put it all in a pile, and call that a quilt. None of you would believe that that was a quilt. Because when you pull the threads apart, you don't get something beautiful, you don't get something meaningful, you don't get something useful, you just get a bunch of threads. And it's only when you start to weave all of the pieces together do you actually get something. You get something that is useful, that is whole. It can endure time and stains and abuse and still exist. Peace is living in right relationship to yourself, in right relationship to others, and in right relationship to God. And what so many of us want to do in the 21st century is pick one or two of those and then wonder why we are not experiencing peace. Because when you are out of right relationship with yourself, what you experience is inner turmoil. You don't know what to do, you don't know how to make decisions. You're experiencing non-clinical levels of anxiety all of the time. And then when you are out of right relationship with other people, what you get is tension and conflict. And some of us have been in tension and conflict with other people so long that we actually think that that's normal. And there are people in our lives that we've always been in conflict with, and we think that that's normal. And then when we're out of right relationship with God, what we experience is an unreconciled relationship. And when you are out of right relationship with yourself, when you're out of right relationship with others, when you're out of right relationship with God, there is no way to live at peace. You've just pulled apart all the threads. And what keeps most of us awake at night are not tasks, but disjointed relationships. The disjointed relationships behind those tasks. So last year in 2023, I decided that I would spend that entire year off of social media, which is absolutely fabulous. Everybody should try it. And the reason was, just because the shape of my life, like I get friend requests and now I can't stop followers because once you hit a certain threshold of people, like Facebook changes your page and anybody who just wants to follow you just can. And I would get these people and they would come on and they would just want to fight about things. Like you've known people like this? Like it does not matter what you say or what anyone says. Like if you got on social media and told these people, it's a beautiful day, they would be like, it's not a beautiful day for everybody. You're not thinking about all the people having a horrible day. Like those folks. So they would just hop on to argue about just whatever. And so I thought, why would anyone want to live like this? To live at that level of discord with just everyone? But that's actually what happens to all of us when we are out of right relationship. So when we are lacking peace, a few things start to happen. The first is that we compartmentalize our lives, which means that we take all of those fragments of our lives and we just accept them as they are, which means that when we're one person with this group of friends and we're another person at work and we're another person with our partner and another person with our kids and another person at church and another person in traffic, we just compartmentalize our lives because we know that our lives lack coherence and we don't know how to weave it all together. And so we compartmentalize. And then if we're not doing that, we just become hyper partisan. That everything becomes about the way that I want it or the way that I think it ought to be done or the people in my tribe think it ought to be done. That we become uncritical about why we see the world the way that we see it and why other people might not. And we see this, and you will see this for the next several months. For people for whom the conflict is the point of politics. For whom the division is the point. And it's not about mutual flourishing or what's beneficial for the common good, but how I can own the other side. And then we become defensive, just to defend our rights, our privileges. This is the way that I want it, the way that I think it ought to go. And it really doesn't matter who is in the room with me or what it's about, whether it is my parents or my children, people that I love. That we just sort of lead with ourselves because we are out of peace. And maybe worse of all, we become people who sanction violence for whatever it is that we want to pursue. And people don't matter as much as our vision of the world begins to matter. But when you open the scriptures tell us that there is a way to weave together all of the threads, to bring together peace with self and others and with God. And your life doesn't have to consist of broken relationships and fragmentation. And this is the way that James, the brother of Jesus, talks about it. He says, who in your community is understanding and wise? Let his example, which is marked by wisdom and gentleness, blaze a trail for others. If your heart is one that bleeds dark streams of jealousy and selfishness, do not be so proud that you ignore your depraved state. The wisdom of this world should never be mistaken for heavenly wisdom. It originates below in the earthly realms with the demons. Any place where you find jealousy and selfish ambition, you will discover chaos and evil thriving under its rule. Heavenly wisdom centers on purity, peace, gentleness, deference, mercy, and other good fruits untainted by hypocrisy. The seed that flowers into righteousness will always be planted in peace by those who embrace peace. So this is what James is saying. Like in your life, if you are experiencing a lack of peace, there is someone in the equation who is being envious, jealous, or selfish. Like this is what creates a lack of peace. And I want you to understand that much of our culture and much of our cultural moment is built on envy, jealousness, and selfishness. That when you leave here today, most of what you will hear for the rest of the week are lessons in envy, jealousy, and selfishness. And we will call it other things, but that's what they are. And I want to be careful because I was raised, and maybe some of you were raised, where you were used by other people, words like selfishness were used to make sure that you didn't take care of yourself. But I want you to understand what selfishness is. Selfishness is not you prioritizing yourself. In some ways, you can't help that. Selfishness is you expecting the rest of us to prioritize yourself. Virtue is prioritizing the right things about yourself so that you become a blessing to the rest of us. And in this day, if you watch the same news that I watch, what we really need is every one of you to walk out of this space today committed to being a person of peace. In your family, in your workplace, on social media, in the voting booth, to be a person of peace. Because what our world really trends on is the myth of redemptive violence. If you haven't heard of it, myth of redemptive violence is really simple. Here's what it is. Someone says something and does something to you, you make sure that you pay them back. Every action movie ever is built on the myth of redemptive violence. That someone does something to you, you have to make sure that you get even. And the reason that our world works this way is because we believe that peace doesn't work. That peace is for suckers, for losers, that turning the other cheek is a great thing to read about, but that if we don't stand up for ourselves, then we will get walked on. We will get abused. And so when everything is finally the way that I want it to be, then I'll worry about being a person of peace. And when everything is finally the way that you want it to be, you cannot be a person of peace because by that point, you have become a person of control. And so when the Apostle Paul writes about it to the church in Rome, this is how he talks about it. He says, work toward unity and live in harmony with one another. Avoid thinking you are better than others or wiser than the rest. Instead, embrace common people and ordinary tasks. Do not retaliate with evil, regardless of the evil brought against you. Try to do what is good and right and honorable as agreed upon by all people. If it is within your power, make peace with all people. So what can you do to live at peace? A few things. Well, for some of us, there are just some people that we're going to have to forgive. And they didn't ask for forgiveness. They don't even think they need forgiveness. But you're just going to have to forgive them. Because guess what? They're going on with the rest of their life as if everything's fine. You're the only one bothered. And it's important to know, just as a human being, that sometimes we want things from people, we ask things of people that they cannot give us. It could be that the person who deeply hurt you cannot give you what you need, but what are you going to do to live at peace? And some of us need to apologize because you knew you were wrong. You were wrong then, you're wrong now, but you got too much pride to just say that I was wrong and move on. And every now and then, maybe late at night, you'll catch yourself being nagged by that thing that you said or you did, or maybe even the thing that you wrote or you thought. And it's just time to apologize. And for many of us, we're just at a place where there is something that we just have to release. You're just carrying it around, and it's not serving you, it's not serving anyone else. And not to be flippant about it, but there's some stuff you're just gonna have to let go. I mean, because you already know that it's not helping you carrying it around now. You just have to let that go. It's in the past. You can't go back and retrieve it. You can't go back and do it. For some of us, there is someone that we are still hurt about, and they have been dead for a long time. Or that happened a long time ago. And giving that, releasing that to God's blessing, or to release a person to God's blessing, to say, like, God, I don't know what to do with this person. I'm just going to have to let you take care of it. Just to release it. And then maybe some of us need to just accept that us living at peace is worth more than living in conflict. Like, I'm just not going to accept that peace, that conflict. I'm moving on. I accept that the world is the way that it is, and there are some things that I can't fix. Because listen, because no one else is going to tell you this. Living at peace and being a person of peace isn't advice from God. It's actually an instruction from the scriptures. That tension you feel when you're out of right relationship, doing something about that isn't a someday thing. It is the invitation of God to weave your life back together and stop living on fragments. That it can be put back together, stitched back together to make something useful and beautiful for the rest of your life. Ecclesia, let me pray for you. God, give us a sense where we might be blind to the places where we are out of relationship with you and with others and with ourselves, and paths forward to see how to bring your power and your spirit to weaving it all together. And this is not something that we can do on our own, but only through your power. And we ask it in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.